academic books of the year,
Mm-hmm.
which was a high award given to scholarly books. The book is Choice magazine, which basically goes out, a magazine of book reviews, goes out to 45,000 librarians. So if you get your book reviewed in there, it gets in front of that big audience.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end of each year, that publication then announces the best books for the year, and they call them the Choice Outstanding Academic Book.
Mm-hmm.
So at Indiana, because of Indiana's sort of greater prestige as an academic institution, I was able to attract even better manuscripts than I was at SUNY. And so, I'll give you an example. I published a book called The Transplanted, A History of Immigrants in Urban America by John Bodnar, B-O-D-N-A-R. And that book got incredible reviews, and it was selected as the Outstanding Academic Book by Choice in 1985. And and then one of the books I selected, called The Chosen People in America by Arnold Eisen, E-I-S-E-N, was a finalist for the National Jewish Book Award.
Hmm.
I got in also when I was in Indiana. I got very interested in the history of religion. So I had, not only did I do Jewish studies, but I did a special series on religion in North America.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had a number of books published on various religions in North America. So I had a book, for example, by Thomas Ham, 2 M's, The Transformation of American Quakerism, which won the American Society of Church History Prize. And then there were a couple books which you never would have thought would have gotten very much review attention.
Mm-hmm.
There was a book that I published which was called Token Refuge, the story of the Jewish refugee shelter at Oswego, New York. And why that was important was that during World War II and the Holocaust, Jews were trying to escape from Europe,
Mm-hmm.
escape the Nazis in Europe. And for a variety of political reasons, they weren't allowed access to entry into the United States. But a few of them managed to get into the United States, and so they were then taken to basically a camp at Oswego, New York, and it sort of was a holding camp, and so it was an important subject that very few people knew about. And so when this book came out, it was reviewed in the New York Times Sunday magazine.
Hmm.
So that was, and then sort of foreshadowing my experience here, I published a book called The New Deal and the West, which is an important book about the American West,
Okay.
and by Richard Lowett. And he's actually one of our authors here. And there was another book that foreshadowed, there was and this book got another Choice Outstanding Academic Book in 1985. It's by Gerald Nash, N-A-S-H, and it's called American West Transformed. And it's the impact of the Second World War on the American West.
Mm-hmm.
And not only did it win an Choice Outstanding Academic Award, but it also was selected by the History Book Club as an alternate selection for the monthly History Book Club. When I was at Indiana, they also, at that time, remember I said before that universities were beginning to develop their Jewish studies programs. Well, at Indiana, that was the case. They were just beginning to develop and expand their own academic Jewish studies program. And so they told me when I arrived that what they wanted me to do was to build a publishing program in Jewish studies, just like to coincide with, to give support to their academic program that they were building. So I started a number of series on modern Jewish history, modern Jewish literature and culture, Jewish social studies, anthropology. What I'll do actually is I can give you a list of all these books that I can.
Okay, that'd be.
And that way you'll have all the titles and everything.
Okay.
Okay. So I stayed at Indiana for 4 years, between 1982 and 1985. And as a result of the books I was publishing, I was starting to get a bit of a reputation in certain areas. And I had a number of people approach me to invite me to apply for director, new director of a publishing house. I ended up applying for a job as the director of Wayne State University Press in Detroit. And I applied for the job, I got the job, and I moved there in December 1985. So I became director of Wayne State University Press. I really hated leaving Indiana because it was really a great place to work, and because the director was so entrepreneurial, it made me more entrepreneurial and made me acquire better and better books. But you know, when you're, this is the whole thing. When you're, this is the kind of advice I always give people. When an acquisition editor comes to me and he says, you know, should I become a director? Because when you're an acquisition editor, you control certain things. You control the books that you're going to publish, because you basically encourage people to send their manuscripts to you, you review them, and then you get them published. And then you can influence certain things, but you can't determine the price. You can't determine whether the cover of the jacket's going to be color or not color. There are certain things you can't control because you're not the decision maker. You're not the director. And so when you're an acquisitions editor, you want to become a director. Okay? When you're a director, you want to become an acquisitions editor. And the reason is that I think an acquisitions editor is probably the best job in the house, because you get to do all the interesting stuff, acquiring and working on very good books, and developing the literature in various fields, actually helping to really shape various fields by the books that you publish. But you don't have the responsibility for the bottom line. When you become director, all of a sudden you are responsible for all the expenses, the costs, and the bottom line. Can you find a way to sell enough books and bring in enough income to cover your expenses? And all of a sudden, that is a fairly heavy weight on every director. You never had that when you were an acquisitions editor. You just had the enjoyment and the pleasure of acquiring great books, but you didn't have to worry whether or not they sold and how much they cost to produce. All of a sudden, as a director, then you have to worry about all those things. And so you had increased responsibilities, you had increased decision-making power. You could influence what directions to take the publishing house, what fields to publish in, whether to do cloth or paperback or just do paperback. There are a lot of things you can determine as a director. And those are things that appeal to me as an entrepreneurial acquisitions editor. But I've given this advice to many acquisitions editors now. I said, you know, you have the best job in the publishing house. You have all the fun and none of the worries. And so I was a young man in a hurry. I wanted to, because that was sort of my second career. I had been an academic professor. And I started late in the publishing business, so I sort of wanted to sort of advance my career as I could. And so I became director in late 1985 of Wayne State, which is in Detroit. And that was, it was a good place to be, you know, Detroit, major urban center. What I try to do when I work with a publishing house, at a publishing house, I try to look at what are the strengths of the institution that you're working at, and you should try to publish books in those areas. Also, what's the geographic area you're in, and publish books about the geography or about the history and culture of that particular area. So in Detroit, I developed a regional. They never had a regional history series there. I developed a whole new line, an imprint called Great Lakes Books. And what I did there was I applied the same lessons I learned right from the very beginning. I established 2 general editors of a series called Great Lakes Books. I created a board of people who were basically the head librarians of the major libraries in the Great Lakes area, heads of historical societies, heads of art galleries, and they all sat as advisors to this series. And then I approached each of them and I said, what are the 10 books that need to be written in this field, and who should write them? And then also, what are the books that maybe have appeared already, but are out of print and need to be brought back into print, or what are the books that have been published in cloth that have not yet been brought out into paperback? And so I would get advice from all of these people, and that created for me a sort of a plan of development for the series. And so I would seek out people to write particular kinds of books. I would acquire the paperback rights to books that were out of print. So I sort of, it's sort of like planning a whole sort of campaign, you know, and you try to figure out how can I establish this series, this new series, and establish dominance, because I have, in Michigan there was Michigan State University Press, University of Michigan Press, and Wayne State University Press. So the 3 presses were competing for books in that area. And so the idea was, okay, how do you compete with them and establish your predominance in that field? So so I established the series in Great Lakes Books,